What's the dumbest thing you believed as a kid? When I was pretty young, probably about 5 years old, I met the Black Power Ranger and got a picture of him signed. In the picture you could see that he was missing his middle finger, and my mom told me it was because he had flipped his mom off, so she cut it off. I believed it until I was about 20 years old when my mom told me she had lied about it and didn't actually know what happened. Growing up, I told so many people this guy's mom cut his finger off. Google says an undisclosed accident when he was 4. So unconfirmed his mom cut it off. Once I was playing with some toys and my mom was talking on the phone to her friend. I guess they were talking about kids growing up and having families someday because my mom puts her hand over the phone and asked me if I wanted kids someday and if I wanted boys or girls. I gave it some thought and said that I wanted one boy and one girl. For the longest time after this, I thought that it had been completely decided, like my mom was just on the phone with whoever you call to place an order for kids, and my order had been finalized. When I was a kid, my mom explained to me that we all had belly buttons because that's how our moms fed us before we were born. So I thought, when you got pregnant, your belly button opened up and you just put whatever you wanted to down there. Like I thought women were just shoving chicken legs in their belly buttons. Plot twist, I'm a postpartum nurse now. That actors/TV characters would have to come back into a studio for each rerun of a show/movie. I would always be so amazed that people would have the time to go into a room with a camera multiple times a day just so I could watch them do the same thing over and over again. I used to think that laugh tracks were somehow real life, like I was hearing everyone else laughing who was watching the same show I was. In hindsight, this is really stupid. Obviously the sound is coming from the speakers, but growing up we only had TV at my grandma's place and I remember laughing really loud when the laugh track came on so all her neighbors would think I got the joke too. I thought that the show was still going on during the commercial breaks, so I was always worried about what I had missed while the commercials were on. People don't like people that grow vegetables in their house. I secretly celebrated my mom's poor in-house gardening skills because her tomato plants never had any tomatoes. I was about 11 when I figured out what those tomato plants were. My grandma G had a glass eye and that she lost her eye in a bar fight. Nope, took me until I was 20 to discover she just had a lazy eye, and my dad and his brothers always told kids that story every holiday meetup. I lived on an Air Force base growing up, where they check IDs to get back on base. The DARE people had just been to my school. My mom had a fresh Diet Coke in her cup holder, and I was instructed to tell a trusted adult if a parent was drinking and driving. So going back on base, I spoke up to the guard checking us in. You can imagine how well that went over, and even after that ordeal, my mom still didn't explain the difference between a Coke and a beer, as she didn't want me to know anything about alcohol. So I just lived in fear that some drinks were okay and others weren't, and I didn't know how to tell the difference, and if my mom would get pulled over for having a Dr. Pepper instead of a Coke one day. Like even my 2-year-old knows some drinks are only for adults and some drinks are okay for everyone. I don't think it's that hard to put into kid-friendly language. Edit. I just remembered they also talked to us about drugs and smoking and how even chew is bad, but I didn't even know what that was and they didn't explain it. So in my little sheltered brain I thought the chewy candy I got for Halloween was also bad and a drug. I'd seen cigarettes from my friend's parents, so I understood that, but they didn't go into detail what chew was, so I thought anything labeled chewy was bad. Fuck dare, they made me a very paranoid kid and didn't explain things properly, just fearmonger to kids who couldn't understand or comprehend what was being said to them. They made me afraid of candy instead of properly explaining things in a way kids could understand. You know those animatronic dinosaurs at museums? I knew they were robots, but as a child I was convinced that the robot was unaware of its animatronic status. I believed that if the robot wanted to, it could and would step over the barrier and eat me and everyone else. This fear was compounded when my dad, more than once, picked me up and pretended he would drop me down the other side of the barrier. My stepdad had an old truck with 2 gas tanks that he would flip a switch to change from one to the other. He had us convinced that he would magically steal gas from other vehicles. He would tell us to pick one, and we would watch the gas dial go from E to F while driving on the highway. Blew my mind. That sex was literally sleeping next to one another and making moaning sounds. I heard things I wanna forget. I thought a baby just randomly appeared in a woman's womb. I stayed awake crying about it because I didn't want to become pregnant. I had no idea that morning sickness was associated with pregnancy. My coach was concerned when I shrugged my shoulders and stated that's what was probably causing my sluggishness at football camp practice. Not me, but my brother was convinced for a few weeks that some cows had longer legs on one side of their body so they could stand on hills. I didn't know cars have a turn signal lever, so I thought the car knew where we were going. I thought the car would use the arrows to tell my parents where to turn. The dinosaurs were still alive on another island, and I kept asking my mother if we could go to the island with all the dinosaurs. Then she told me they were all dead. I used to watch my dad go to the ATM, look at the receipt, and get grumpy/frustrated. I knew how bank accounts and ATMs worked, but the kid logic part of my brain figured that they also kind of worked like slot machines. In that, when you conducted some transaction on them, you got that slip with 3 icons on it. If you got one with 3 cherries, for example, you would take it inside, and they would deposit $50 or whatever into your account. I figured he was frustrated because he kept losing all the time. I even asked him a few times when he was looking at the receipt, "Did you win?" And he was like, "No." For some reason, I thought every car that was made had to do a crash test. Probably because my dad once told that our car had a very good rating in the crash test. I was amazed by the fact that old cars were repaired so well before being sold. That all bald men were kidnappers. No idea where it came from. I really don't think I was kidnapped as a child. But if I was, it was definitely a bald man that did it. When I was young, my parents told me that if I kept leaving the fridge open, then I would freeze the whole world and then no one would like me. That we had to change our names during different stages of our lives. Like we have a toddler's name, a teenager's name, and an adult's name. Timmy, Tim, Timothy. My dad also made me believe there were little gnomes working in ATM and vending machines. My brother and I wrote letters to Santa, and our dad would open up the coal furnace door and we would throw them in the fire. We believed they would go directly to the North Pole. I often got caught doing stupid stuff when I was a young rascal. When I would get home, my dad would say a little birdie told him he seen me do such and such with the boys. Up until I was 8 or 9 maybe, I believed my father had some sort of snitch pigeon keeping an eye on me. Escalator stairs were one time use and just kinda piled up under the floor. My brother used to think that a man sat under the escalators and operated them. He also thought that man's name was James and that was his real dad, not our dad. So every time we passed the escalators at the mall, my brother would scream at our dad, "You're not my real dad. James is my real dad." So, more details. My brother has always had a vivid imagination. I have no earthly idea where he got this from. He is currently trying to become a writer/director/producer/etc. Also, he's a spitting image of my dad, so there's no question of paternity there. My brother is just a freaking weirdo. When I was about 4, my older sister told me that since the population of Japan was so high, Japanese people slept sideways on their beds so they could fit more people on every bed. I believed it until I went to a sleepover at 13 and suggested that we sleep Japanese style on the bed so everyone could fit. 2 gems from my youth. 1. I used to think my testicles were the eggs of my future children. Like, one day they would hatch and I'd have 2 kids. 2. I thought safe sex meant someone left their clothes on. That fat people explode when they get too fat. That the gender of a baby depended on which person was trying harder during sex. I was told that your left and right testicles produce different gendered sperm. My dad used to make stir fry fairly often with chicken. One night as I was eating it, I asked what the meat was. "Octopus," he replied. Seemed logical enough at the time, so I just accepted it and moved on with my life. From then on, whenever we had stir fry, someone would inevitably ask, "How's your octopus?" And I would answer, "Fine." or something similar. Fast forward, I'm 18, home from college on break and we are having stir fry. How's your octopus? Fine. You guys are all a-holes. Not sure if this was just a UK thing, but as a child I had some of those gooey jelly alien toys that came in plastic eggs, and the big rumor on the playground at the time was if you put a boy alien and girl alien in the same egg and put it in the fridge, they would make a new baby alien overnight. I told my parents about it and told them I was doing it. While in bed, my parents added the extra baby alien overnight. So when I woke up and found the third alien, I lost it. Went into school and told everyone. 4 years I swore blind it was true and really happened. It was a very heartbreaking day when I realized what had happened. When I was younger, my dad upgraded the speaker setup for the TV to include surround sound. The rear speakers were mounted to the ceiling and were large white boxes. On the front of the speakers it had the numbers 3508. I always thought that was kind of strange until many years later I realized they were both speakers mounted upside down. My brother had me convinced for a while that each person had to have a unique favorite color, and since his was blue, I had to change mine. On my first day of kindergarten, we had to introduce ourselves and say our favorite color. I was super stressed out because the kids in front of me picked the good colors, and I kinda panicked and told everyone my favorite color was gray. In my family we were kind of assigned colors by my parents. My little sister and I looked like identical twins, so my parents dressed us in different colors. My older sister was much taller than us and had already chosen blue as her color, so my parents went with a chipmunks theme. The oldest was blue like Simon. I was red for Alvin and my little sister was green for Theodore. Anytime a family member brought us back t-shirts or dresses from their travels we always got our color and it kind of stuck. We still all predominantly wear our colors. We're all in our late 30s and even our raincoats as adults are our colors. It's quite silly. I've only ever worn a red raincoat. When I buy a new one it's always a red one. I thought that my stomach was actually the entire volume of my body. Eating food would pile it all up, as if putting it into a bag. When I was asked why I would drink or eat smaller foods when I was full, my reasoning was there are still cracks between all the other food I ate, so it can fall through those gaps. When I was younger, our garage always had a very distinct smell. My parents told my siblings and I that the smell in our garage was the smell of burnt tires because my dad would work on cars and dirt bikes as a hobby. Being the middle child, we always tend to find out the family secrets, whether we want to or not. Fast forward to when I'm 15 years old. I standing in a parking lot with my mother and two girls I was in acquaintance with. As we were all waiting in this parking lot for our friend who was having the quince, I started to smell burnt tires. I said to my mom that it smelled like burnt tires. My mom and the two girls all started chuckling. I was confused as to what was funny and the two girls said to me that I was not smelling burnt tires. My mom eventually told me what that smell was, and she just tried to convince me my smelling was off. I still put 2 and 2 together that night. In short, I was 15 years old when I found out that my dad was a huge pothead and would just smoke pot all the time in our garage. Also, burnt tires and weed should not smell the same. Once before I was old enough to read, my dad and I were waiting for my mom who was donating clothes to the local Goodwill, and apparently I wouldn't stop yelling. My dad told me she was in the shouting kid store looking for trade me in for a kid that didn't yell so much. Never shouted in the car again. Also didn't trust that Goodwill face logo for many years. Oh, this is something that just bit me in the ass last year. I grew up in a very small town. One of my friends was from a city. I was over at his place and his mom gave us a pomegranate. I've never seen or even heard of this before. Well, he told me not to eat the seeds because they were poison. Last year my wife bought a pomegranate for my son who was interested in trying new types of food. I said to my wife, just be sure he doesn't eat the seeds. She looked at me funny. I said they really should put a warning label on them because the seeds are poisonous. She broke down laughing. I googled. Hats off to you, Sandy. You got me good. It was 30+ years. I thought boys didn't have balls till they hit puberty. I took their balls drop literally. I believed mothers breastfed regular milk with the right boob and, get this, chocolate milk with the left boob. Oh boy, I've been waiting for a question like this. So I grew up near a nuclear power plant, which 4-year-old me thought was a cloud factory. My parents didn't take me to church, but I knew that people went to church to worship God, who created the world. I was also a huge fan of the Care Bears at that time, who lived in the clouds. What do those 3 random tidbits about myself have to do with this question? Well, 4-year-old me came to the conclusion that the Care Bears go to church and worship the nuclear power plant as the creator of their world. That was perfect logic to my tiny toddler brain. My father told me once that I was actually an alien, and they found and adopted me. I believed it for over a year, would go around telling people this wonderful backstory of mine. Eventually it got back to him, and he didn't even remember telling me the story in the first place. My mom told me she had eyes in the back of her head. One day she was washing dishes and I poked the back of her head. She screamed down my eyes, and for the longest time I thought she really did have eyes in the back of her head. At age 5 or 6 I see a spider zooming across the floor of the house I lived in with my mom and I start freaking out and refuse to move from my position standing in a chair until it's dead. This house had most rooms carpeted with thick, fuzzy carpet that a spider could easily slip away unnoticed in. My mom tells me not to worry, that by the time the spider crosses the carpeted living room floor to the linoleum kitchen it'd be dead, since spiders can only walk a few feet before they die, since their lifespan is so short. I believed this until about age 19, when I started really thinking about it. As a young child I thought, if I had more stuffed animals then they would be used as more witnesses if I was ever attacked in my sleep. It took me over 200 plus stuffed animals to realize that they are stuffed animals and not living animals. I genuinely thought that stuffed animals were real animals. Side note, having over 200 stuffed animals in your bedroom at the age of 13 doesn't make you that popular in school. When I was a kid I thought that you could take the butt off the firefly and they would live. My dad used to smash it on my bike tire and it would glow. Then the firefly, lightning bug, would fly away. I found out when I was like 15 that he was just tossing it in the air. It wasn't flying. It wasn't flying, rocking in fetal position. I thought women got pregnant through their wedding rings. I thought that the diamond in every ring contained some magic baby serum that would be injected into the bride's finger once the ring was put on her finger, thus resulting in pregnancy. I thought you could bypass having kids by just not getting married lol. That ends meet was only for rich people, because poor people could work 2 jobs and still not be able to make ends meet. I don't remember how old I was before I realized my grandparents and parents were talking about earning enough money to make ends meet, but I was embarrassed for myself that I misunderstood it, even though it was something I finally figured out on my own without someone explaining it to me. I saw an educational program on childbirth as a young kid. I watched, mystified, as a child was born from what only made sense to my young mind, an ear surrounded by hair. So, for a few years, I believed we were all delivered out the side of our mothers' heads. I was shocked when I found out the truth, but my dad had a good laugh